Gourmet number 2, Fork and Knife. Well, hello, my brothers and sisters of the Nerd Nation. I, as always, am Jim, here to bring you another review on the awesome and action-filled tale, and also mouth-watering, I guess we should add mouth-watering, tale of Toriko. Our last chapter, of course, saw us with really the world just kind of being introduced, and ultimately Toriko and Komatsu going on their capture, on their journey to the Baron Archipelago, and of course, it kind of ended off with them, about to go after this Garara Gator. We also found out that there is claimed to be there is this one that is 300 years old, twice the age of the normal, the typical Garara Gator, and an even higher capture level than what we previously thought. So that is how the chapter ended, the first one, and that's right where things pick up over here. And of course, Komatsu is really kind of the funny sort of sidekick, scared of his own shadow type of deal. And within the first couple of pages, he goes and he's like, ah, and he freaks out. He does a high-pitched girl-like scream, and Toriko's like, dude, it's just a snake frog. Don't worry about it. And he grabs like this 3 or 4 foot thing. And he's like, oh yeah, by the way, these taste good. We'll save it for later. Well, Komatsu goes and he's like, oh man, what's on my arm? And we see that he has a leech on his arm, So, so Toriko tells him, oh, that's a leech, and this and that. And he says if you pull it off, you'll just wind up bleeding more. Your skin will come with it. Your flesh will come with it because it digs in there deep. So he goes over and he grabs some leaves from a tree, and he goes and takes them and squeezes them, and this little drop of something comes out and lands on the leech, and the leech just jumps off him. And he's like, whoa, it just slipped right off. So Toriko goes and explains. He says, well, those what that is those are mangrove leaves, right? The mangroves that on the edge of the islands and stuff here, they actually grow and get their nourishment, of course, from the seawater, and the salt that they soak up in that seawater is transferred to their leaves. And he gives this big explanation of it, which stuff like that to me is very cool. It's world building things, and it's giving you background knowledge of the world itself, and it shows you that the writer, the author, actually thought enough to come up with these little nuances and these backgrounds and everything. So I think it was kind of cool. So anyway, and it also has a plot point for later on in the chapter over here. So then they're kind of going about their business, and it's later on, and Toriko says, let's, we're going to sit down, we're going to camp here for the night, and Komatsu's like, well, yeah, but shouldn't we go press in further and get the Garara Gator? And he goes, no, it's nocturnal, so ultimately it'll be easier to take care of during the day, so we'll sleep here tonight, and then we'll go in, deeper tomorrow, right? And no pun intended with the going deeper there, so for any of you that caught it or have sick minds like me. So they're sitting there, and they got the campfire out, and they're munching up the snake frog that they had, right? And they're eating. Oh, this is good. This is great. And they notice that there's a bunch of animals kind of hanging around. Komatsu says, why are all these animals hanging around, like right, on the outskirts of their campfire light? And he's like, well, they're predators, but when there's not enough food, they basically become like scavengers. They're almost like stray dogs that are just looking for food. At least that's what I took from it. So what we kind of deduce from this whole thing is that the Garara Gator is pretty much just going through everything in this area of the Baron Archipelago, this island, and just taking out everything that it comes across, just devouring everything, literally eradicating species on its way, and everything is kind of being forced to move on because the food supply, of course, is dwindling, So it's kind of a cool thing because that from finding out in the first chapter, there's like 200,000 different species of animal here, and Komatsu says, and that's all in danger of becoming extinct, if this thing keeps going. And then once it runs out of food here and it goes unchecked, they're amphibious. It's going to go in the ocean, So really kind of a cool thing there, a cool exchange. And then we wind up going, we see all of a sudden they're kind of like, what the hell is that? And I guess they camped out near like a swamp or whatever, So all of a sudden this huge looking, I don't know, snake or something. It looks like the giant head of like a hydra comes out of the water, comes up at him, and then just goes and flops over. And you see that this thing has this giant bite taken out of it, right? Just huge, because this thing probably was, I don't know, 30, 40 foot, in length, and there's just this huge bite, so probably 10 feet around, and it's huge bite taken out of it. Toriko says, that must be the Garara Gator, and he's kind of starting to put something together, and we don't really know what, they're talking about. Well, first he kind of just says, what could it be that took such a big bite out of it, blah, 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 but we all know and feel it's the Garara Gator, right? So while this is all happening, Komatsu is sitting there, and he goes and you can tell it's one of those things like straight out like Scooby-Doo or something, where everybody's looking one way and like Scooby's the other way, and he sees the monster coming at him, because he's just like, and Toriko's like explaining everything about this and that, and about these things are called Baron Leeches and everything else, and all of a sudden, boom, man, he turns around and the Garara Gator is there, right? And this fucker is huge. He's got 8 legs, just drawn real cool, real menacing, just like this giant monster, that's coming at him, and it says capture level 8, it's the 300-year-old one. So they wind up figuring out, Toriko figures out that because Komatsu, his hand wouldn't stop bleeding, and he was asking him before this Garara Gator appeared, how come it won't stop bleeding? And he says, oh, well, basically these leeches, they infect you, and what happens is your blood won't coagulate for a little while afterwards because of this kind of like poison that they spit into you. Don't worry, it'll eventually stop bleeding, and Komatsu was like, eventually? What the hell? So we wind up finding out, though, it's kind of cool. Toriko goes and there's an exchange where he smacks this gator around a little bit over there, tells Komatsu to get behind him, and he kind of comes at him. He's like, I haven't had a good fight in a while, and he's tussling with him, he's wrestling with the gator, right? But we wind up finding out that these leeches are actually called Baron Leeches, and these leeches, they share a symbiotic, what do you call it, connection with their host, with their larger animal host. And for anybody that doesn't know what that means, I remember what this means from like Spider-Man comics with Venom and with Carnage, and they were symbiotes. And basically what it is that these leeches, they kind of share a collective consciousness. So when some of them latch onto a larger animal, like the Garara Gator, there's a ton of them inside of his mouth living in there, they can communicate with other ones that are around in the area, maybe in the proximity, and when one of those leeches latches onto something, it's like a tracker, it's like a radar, it can smell the blood and just be attracted to it. It's a really ingenious way of it being able to find things, because even Toriko mentions that this giant swamp snake or whatever, that's why they were a capture level 5, because they're so hard to track in the swamp, right? But this Garara Gator, obviously he's got the built-in homing beacon, So really kind of a cool thing. And then Komatsu's like, he's still bleeding, because Toriko asked me, so he's still bleeding? He's like, oh yeah, no, there's another one on me. He's freaking, And he's like, so I've been like a tracking beacon this whole time. And they wind up comparing it to like the Komodo dragon, whereas the Komodo dragon, when it goes in it and it bites or it spits or whatever, it has, it has similar type of poison in there. I forget exactly what the word that they use for it. It's escaping me right now. But more or less what happens is that this poison that gets into its prey, even if it doesn't beat its prey right away, it can pretty much just step back and wait for this to take it over, and within a few hours it'll go down, because of it, the infection more or less spreading in it. So very, very cool stuff. But towards the end over here, and what I think is really cool is, because I didn't know last chapter about the whole fork and knife thing and everything else, right? He goes and just does this crazy man up type of beast mode, and I think it's called his battle mode, and that's what, and Komatsu's kind of narrating the whole thing, like, that's the first day I saw Toriko's battle mode. And you go and you just see this cool looking drawing of Toriko that just, again, looks like something straight out of like Thundercats or something like that. It just looks like this feral, just kick your ass type of jungle cat, And then he goes to come at this Garara Gator, but before he does, he kind of does like a respectful thing, like, oh, bless this bountiful and the bounty of the world, for the food that I'm about to, take care of, right? And it's really kind of cool. He has this ritual, it seems like, and I don't know if it continues throughout the series, but it's neat right now. So he goes and then comes at him, and right, and the fork and knife thing, he goes and his hand is like a claw. He comes and he like uppercuts the thing from underneath and goes, fork! And I mean, he's got this thing and he's holding it out in front of him, and he just goes and kind of slams it on the ground, and as he turns to do that, he takes the other hand and he's like, knife! And he just goes and lops this thing's head off. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention is that just before that, he went and he asked Komatsu, he's like, hey, listen, this thing's bigger than we thought and everything else. Is it okay if we don't bring it back alive? And Komatsu was like, what? And he's like, is it okay if I take this thing out? And Komatsu's like, yeah, sure, no problem. So he does the fork and the knife thing, which I just described, man, and I mean, just lops its head off. And the chapter ends up with them sitting around triumphantly talking, and he's cooking up some of it by the fire, and Komatsu's like, oh, is that okay that we can do that? That's, that's the bounty. That's what we got hired to, to bring back. And he's like, listen, we wouldn't, and Toriko's like, we couldn't carry all this meat back if we wanted to anyway. So we're just going to sit here, we're going to eat up. And he's like, and it just looks so good, even in black and white, just this succulent, juicy steak. And then he's like, and then Komatsu's like, that day was the best food I had ever had, right? So they're munching, and as these panels are going by, you don't see anything except for kind of like the background, and you see like Komatsu basically going, Toriko, if there's another opportunity like this, do you think I can come with you, on one of these hunts? And Toriko's like, yeah, I gotta strike while the iron's hot, and there's just this banter back and forth, and it's really nothing too important, but it winds up going down to the bottom panel of the page, and it just goes and shows us the Garara Gator's bones, right? And you're like, what the hell? And then as if something straight out of like Luffy from One Piece where he just like overeats and his whole body stretches out, you then go and you see just laying on the ground Toriko, and I mean, he's just like a giant freaking beach ball, right? He's eaten the entire gator with Komatsu. Komatsu wound up, partaking in it once he saw how good it looked and everything else. But, Komatsu's like, what the hell? We were supposed to bring that back. What are we going to tell them, And Toriko's like, oh, you just tell them that it was so succulent and juicy and good that we just, we just couldn't help ourselves type of thing, right? And he's like, although it was very good, it isn't going to make my special gourmet menu, And then Komatsu goes and the chapter ends up with him going, oh yeah, sure, now it's not going to make your gourmet menu. like when you were eating it, it was pretty damn good, right? And then the chapter ends up and it's just kind of like, will Toriko ever be able to fill his menu, So I'm assuming this is the end of like the first little maybe mini arc or little story arc just to kind of get things going. But all in all, very fun. Again, the drawing is really nice. It's on point. I just like the use of shadows and just overall the different animals that you see, these cool little amalgamations of animals that we know, and the world itself just seems like it's a fun, vibrant world. They even mentioned earlier in the chapter when Komatsu said about a bunch of flying creatures around and stuff. He even said Toriko was like, yeah, helicopters don't even dare come in here because of these things. And then Komatsu mentioned, oh, that's why we had to come in by boat. So all in all, very, very good. I thought that it was neat. My chapter question though for you, brothers and sisters, is what do you think of Toriko's battle mode? It really looked like he just straight up, because even Komatsu mentioned, and it looked like he turned into a demon when he when he did that. So I don't know if that's just supposed to be drawn that way to make it look like, hey, he's really angry and he's just, or if like he just straight up has some kind of otherworldly power and that's what makes him so badass that he's able to, literally transform himself. I'm not really sure on that one. So, but either way, answer the question, leave your comments and the answer to that question in the comments down below. I can't even talk over here, for Christ's sakes. And feel free to hit the thumbs up, the like button if you should think that I deserve it, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We look forward to catching all of you in the next one, nation. As always, brothers and sisters, thank you so much for liking, commenting, rating, subscribing, and spreading the word of the nation. We'll look forward to catching you in the next one.